Okay, now we're broadcasting, so we should have people joining us. All right.
Awesome.
Welcome to folks who are logging on right now. We're just going to give everyone a minute to join. Thanks for joining. I see our attendee list is growing. I know we had some great signups. Really appreciate everyone for rolling with us here as we do a virtual demonstration.
Yeah, very excited.
Yeah. Wow, we've got over 40 people on the line right now.
Yay!
Yeah, and great. So Terry just used the chat box. So if anyone is new to Zoom, if you're joining as an attendee, you're sort of in a listen mode, so you don't have to worry about any background noise getting picked up. And so your main forms of communicating with us would be through the chat box and the Q&A box. And we'll be collecting the questions for Q&A throughout, so feel free to type in a question at any time, and then Heidi will take breaks periodically and we'll go through some of the questions. And the chat box as well, that's especially helpful if there's a pressing concern, maybe you realize that we're frozen and we haven't realized that, you can let us know in the chat. I'll just give a few more minutes here while people log on. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. It's really exciting. It's fun to have this opportunity to virtually connect. In the past couple of years, Fibershed has done in-person workshops during Fashion Revolution Week and Earth Week, and we really focused on connecting and sharing skills with one another. And this year we can't be together in person, but we're really excited to have Heidi here today, and we did an eco printing demo with Corey yesterday. And yes, both of these sessions have been recorded or will be recorded. We'll be making the video available as fast as we can turn it around with our upload speeds. Thanks for folks who are chiming in on the chat. Yeah, thanks for joining us. All right, I'm going to start recording now. Oh, we already started recording. Okay. Well, I'll just introduce myself then. I'm Jess. I work with Fibershed, which is a nonprofit organization based in Northern California. And this program is sponsored by Fibershed as part of our educational goals to really reshape our relationship with material culture. And so I'm really excited to be here with Heidi Iverson today, who will introduce herself, but Heidi has predated my time with Fibershed. She's one of the original members and designers who was part of the very early Fibershed project here in Northern California. And she's been doing some amazing, she does many things, but lately has been doing a lot of mending and patchwork-based work. So that's what we're focused on in today's video.
Yep, okay. I'm Heidi Iverson. I live in Western Sonoma County in a second growth redwood forest. And like Jess said, I've been an early member of the Fibershed. I knit Rebecca one of her sweaters for her first year wardrobe. So it's been really interesting to see how the Fibershed has grown. And I think sometime in November of last year, I started teaching again and really focusing on mending, and became quickly obsessed with patchwork and mending. And I've always loved quilting. And from there, I started also naturally dyeing thread so that I could get colors that I wanted for the naturally dyed fabric I was making. Yeah, and today I'm going to talk about tools, and we'll do the patchwork pouch, which I know a lot of people have downloaded the pattern and have made a bunch of them, and that makes me super happy. It's been really interesting to see, yeah, everything on social media. And then at the tail end, we can talk more about how all of that can be applied to mending of garments and pre-mending if you know things are starting to wear out. Okay, sound good? Start stitching?
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. And
Okay.
I'll just plug that for folks who are tuning in live or watching this recording later, if you're joining in and using some of these techniques, definitely tag us on social media. Heidi is at Honeyfolk Clothing, and Fibershed is at Fibershed with an underscore at the end. We would love to see your projects and what you're working on. And in the video, we'll be linking the pouch tutorial that Heidi mentioned, and more information too. So check that out if you're looking for those links.
Awesome. Okay, here we go.
All right. We're switching views now. Heidi has a great setup here. So
yeah, I'm gonna move my hoop stand, and we will start with tools. So to me, the most important tools you can have are your thread and your needles. So that being said, I'll get out the threads and I'll get out my needles. So basic threads, like I always have sewing thread, which is just, you know, regular cotton or polyester, like whatever you have, but have some in different colors. And this you're going to use if you do basting or whip stitching down of patches to secure your patches, or even fine little detail work. Then we have traditional sashiko thread. This is a finer gauge, and it has a nice little sheen. I love this. This is the thread that I dye, and it has varying sheens and lots of different colors, and it's all naturally dyed. And all of this is actually zero waste because I buy it from a charity shop that we have in town. And so it's all scrap, 100% cotton thread that I'm repurposing. Some other ones that are really useful are button thread or heavy duty thread. Comes in tons of colors. It's like 3 times as thick as sewing thread. And again, it's just nice to have because it's a slightly different texture. It comes in lots of colors. It's very, very easy to find. And I like using different weights of threads because I feel like it makes the piece more interesting, especially if you are doing sort of monochromatic colors. Here are some pearl cottons. It comes in 2 or 3 different widths. You can get fine and you can get heavier, and it's called pearl cotton because of the tight twist and the little bump it kind of makes. This is a really beautiful company called Valdani that they make really, really gorgeous, gorgeous colors. Yeah, you should check them out, but they do not sponsor me. But the great thing about pearl cottons is they're easy to find, they're inexpensive, they have good yardage, and they wear really nicely. Needles, it's good to have a needle container. These are traditional sashiko needles, and they come in all kinds of sizes. Let me grab my other ones. You can also use milliner's needles, crewel needles, embroidery needles, and chenille needles. The important thing is to have a large eye because you're using thicker threads. And so that is the #1 most important aspect. But as you can see, they even come in these tiny eyed ones that are short, almost like a quilter's needle. And this is meant just for sewing thread. You can't get thick thread through that, but it's a good, nice, sturdy needle. This is a milliner's needle. It has a smaller eye, as you can see. This is also a milliner's needle. This was my favorite embroidery needle before I found sturdier needles. And as you can see, it bends, which is why a stronger needle is better. And if you do a lot of handwork like I do, you will do this to your needles, which they're not very useful once they get to this stage. Okay. Get these put away. Okay, and then we'll talk about hoops. Let me get this. All the things. Keep my space from being too cluttered. Hoops. Also very, very important to find a hoop that you like. They're easy to find in thrift stores. I've actually not bought any of my hoops new. I've gotten them all used. Bamboo hoops are probably the most likely to find. This is a 9-inch hoop. This is a great size. If I was only going to buy one hoop, basically between 7 and 9 inches are the most useful sizes, even up to a 10, because you can fit them through most things. This is a 4.5 by 9-inch oval hoop. You don't find oval hoops as often unless they're just in plastic. And these are really good for shirt sleeves and knees of pants, or like, you know, narrow spaces. So it's nice to have one of these. And this is a larger hardwood hoop, which you don't see as often, and you can tell that this is handmade by the hardware. This is probably one of my favorite hoops. These are really hard to find because oval hoops are not something most people in the United States use. They tend to just basically have the round and the small oval, but not the big oval. And this is my giant hoop stand that everybody asks me about, and I love to the moon and back. It was made by a company called Marie Products, and they're no longer in business, but you can find them like on the internets. And there's other hoop stands too that are available. Let's see, let's do marking pencils and pens. So I think it's important to have a chalk pen for you to circle damage on your garments, to even make notes like in directions. Like if you want to go in certain directions, it's nice to have reminders. These are great, they're refillable. These are also refillable, but these have a little track. So they make really straight, nice lines. The only thing is the little metal wheel tends to snag on looser woven fabrics. This is just a regular chalk pencil. And this is a water-soluble ink marker. And these are nice for fine detail work. Like if I'm going to do really intricate patterns, this is what I use because it won't dust out like the chalk. And it goes away with a little spritz of water. So super, super good tool. Let me grab this and this, sorry, and some of these. Sorry for my arms reaching around and being kind of crazy. I want to talk about pins and thimbles. So safety pins, excellent to have because you can use it to pin fabric out of the way and it won't stab you. It's also good for holding patches in place if you like using pins. This is a coilless safety pin. So you can see it doesn't have the coil. I prefer these because they don't get caught in your fabric. Sometimes fabric, especially delicate fabric, can get caught in here and it can damage it. So keep that in mind. And these are just straight pins, just good old sewing straight pins. And then glue sticks. I actually love glue sticks. I found ones that are refillable now, which I'm really excited about. I haven't tried them yet. But I like it because it's less waste. But I often use this, and it's a special fabric glue stick that's water soluble, and it's great for sticking patches down, and then you don't have to worry about your thread getting caught on pins. Next up, thimbles. There are so many kinds of thimbles, like so many kinds of thimbles. This is like a very inexpensive sashiko thimble, which I think is, if you want to see whether or not you like this style, it's a good one to start with. They also make these beautiful leather ones that if you end up doing it a lot, I would invest in one of those. But this is really good if you're gathering a lot of stitches or working without a hoop, because you don't have to use a hoop. I use an embroidery hoop because I use my hands so much. It's hard for me to hold onto one for a long period of time. But this you use to push through fabric, and I'll show you how to do that. Actually, I'll just do this. This is a tailor's thimble. You need to know your size. I ordered this and it was too big, but basically it fits over the tip of your finger. So if you've long fingernails, or if you just want the top open because it's less hot, you can do really good side pushing with these. The dimples are nice and deep. That's really important to look for. You want deep dimples because that catches the eye of your needle so it doesn't slip and stab you. This is an open-sided thimble. It's made out of brass, so if you have a metal allergy, it's not good, but it's comfortable, it breathes. You can have long fingernails if you have long fingernails. This little edge catches things because these dimples aren't as deep, but I've found that it doesn't slip. But you can use, it's for side pushing, and you can do a little bit of tip pushing because of this edge. My favorite thimble is this, which is a soft touch thimble. And again, it's open so it breathes, it's squishy. this is really hard and the dimples are super deep. And so it's good for tip pushing. It's good for side pushing. But again, thimbles are really very much a personal preference, and you only really need to use them if you do a lot of like mending and sewing. It takes a little bit to get used to them. You definitely, I mean, at least for me, I had to force myself to use them because I found them a little bit annoying. The next thing, I'll get my pouch out of the way. I make mending pouches because I wanted something that was really good for travel, that I could take everything with me. Rulers. Yes, you need them. No, you don't need them. This little 6-inch ruler is my favorite. It has all the measurements clearly marked. It's easy to read, and it's super sturdy because it's thick. Yeah, this is probably my favorite ruler. Next, but a lot of people don't have 6-inch rulers. They're not necessary. 12-inch rulers, most people have a 12-inch ruler. So I say if you have a 12-inch ruler, good enough. But it's good for measuring, which you will do. So that is my 2 cents on hoops and tools. So does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Heidi. Yeah, a few questions came in,
Okay.
so I'll read them out. Malia would like to know the brands of the chalk pens and also the refillable glue stick, if you have that information.
Okay, so I'm trying to remember. So the chalk pens are Clover. Clover has a lot of really good craft stuff, and it's not expensive. So I would say pretty much anything Clover is good to buy and works really well. And they're called Choco Liners, the ones that are refillable. And then, and the other ones, I can't remember. Dritz makes the other one, the one that looks more like a pen. And it's always in the quilting section. Yeah, and it's Dritz. And I think it's just called Quilter's Chalk. You know, and it's a little more expensive, but it's less expensive than the Choco Liners. And yeah, it comes with, and you can get colors. You can get like white, peach, orange, red, purple. Yeah, they're super useful. And then the refillable glue sticks, it has a 2-part name and I can see it. But if you Google that, or, you know, shake the internet, you'll see it. Like it pops up fairly quickly. Yeah, I'm gonna order one soon because I was gonna wait till my glue stick runs out. But yeah, I think they're a good alternative. I wish somebody would make a glue stick in one of those paper cardboard push tubes like they do like cheek tint and lip gloss and under it. It would be awesome. So if anybody needs something to invent, work on that. I'll buy them. Totally want those. Okay. Any other questions?
Great. Yeah, a question from Jill on how do you know the right size for your thimble?
Okay, so that thimble I got from Lassis, which is an amazing company in Berkeley, and you can buy basically a thimble measurer. I didn't want to buy one, so I just guessed. My other thimbles are, I think, medium large. I have big hands,
So it's small, medium, large. It's not like a ring size.
Well, so I think the tailor's thimbles are more like a ring size, but I think it's specific to thimbles. And there's got to be a way to just take a measurement. I just haven't done that yet. But like Lassis, they sell an actual like guide. But I'm sure somewhere somebody has like the measurement, so you can just wrap a string or a piece of paper around your finger and take a measurement like you do with rings. But yeah, I'd say for the most part. And that's one of the nice things about adjustable thimbles. And like the soft touch thimble, like I can wear it on my middle finger, which is the finger that I use, but people use different fingers. And so if I was to use it on another finger, I would get the like small, if that's helpful.
Yeah. Jill said her thimble seems to fall off. Can you recommend a fit that you're looking for? Like how tight?
Trying to think.
Comfortable?
It's
Is that maybe just getting used to it?
and it'll just slightly twist, but it won't spin, right? I think, yeah. I feel like it barely moves, but it's not tight. Yeah, and I think that's how I have my adjustable one set too, is like it's not squeezing my finger, but it doesn't really move on you. Yeah.
That's helpful. I didn't know there were thimble sizes personally.
Oh, I
Thank you for
didn't
sharing
either.
that.
I didn't either, and I hated thimbles forever. And then I was like, oh my God, I need to learn how to use a thimble. They also make these little reusable leather thimbles that you can use
Right.
to push or to grip. And once they run out of stickiness, I actually just use some double-sided tape that I cut, and I just keep adding it to keep making it sticky. So,
Great.
but yeah.
All right. I think, and then we have another question about, can you show the embroidery hoop stand one more time?
Oh yeah, you'll see it a lot.
Okay.
There it is. It's a 12, or it's a 10, no, it's an 11 inch. It's 11 inch. And my friend is actually, she has my 14-inch hoop, and she is, she's gonna make it into a stand for me. And I found one other company that makes like a hoop stand similar to that, and it's double-sided, but it's plastic. And I know one of my followers on Instagram, she bought it, and it's by Morgan. And I don't think, not all their hoops are plastic, but I think the conversion hoop is, and it's like 10 on one side and 7 on the other. And that was probably the best other hoop stand. They also make ones you can sit on that are more for embroidery, but I like to move my hoop around, and so to have something stationary doesn't work for me. But it's all about style, so you might find those really useful.
Great.
So yeah.
Great. All right. Well, that's all the questions.
Okay.
I do think you kind of moved your mending kit out of the way, but I'd love to see it for a moment if you want to just show us.
Oh yeah,
your
yeah.
kit. Heidi has these beautiful, often naturally dyed kits that are on your website, available
This
to
one
purchase
is,
if anyone's looking for it.
yeah, this one is mine, and so it's not dyed, and it's actually not the final product. I'll just quick grab one.
Okay. And thanks everyone for participating and asking questions. Please continue to use the Q&A. The Q&A is a little easier for me to sort through than the chat box, just as an FYI for the questions.
Yeah, and so this is the end version I made because I felt like it was a better size and more travelable, but it has like little pockets where you can sort stuff, a big pocket, and then another big pocket, and then it ties up really nice. So yeah, and you can just stick your pins on the outside too if you want to, which I do when I'm working a lot. That out of the way. Thanks. Okay. And okay, so we'll start on the patchwork pouch. Wish my table was slightly bigger. So for anybody that downloaded the patchwork pouch pattern, it looks like this. And basically when I start, I always start with a piece of base fabric because I always work in a hoop, but you don't have to. You can just make a piece of backing fabric that's the same size as the project that you're working on. So the first thing I do is I actually just fold in half one way and then the other way so I can find my center point. And then from there, I'll chalk out my project so that I have some place to put all my pieces in. So, and that's what the 17 by 17, or you can do 18 by 18, works well for this project. If you're using a bigger hoop, you can use a smaller hoop and then you don't need as much border, but you need about 2 inches overhang for your hoop if you're doing a larger hoop. Then I will grab these 2 pieces. I will show you these. See, this is the hoopless piece, and like I didn't glue down this patch because I'm going to show you, whoops, how great this is. But like all you do is that you don't need a lot of glue, and you can pull it off and re-wet it. Otherwise, what I would do, oh, and your patches, this is a good tip that I want to make sure I told you. I usually cut them so there's about a 1/4 inch overlay, because your fabric, it will shrink a little bit as you stitch depending on how tightly you pull your stitches. And so it's good to have a little bit of overlap. So that is that. And then I'll show you a no hoop technique on this, but first we'll get going on this piece. So get out my hoop, and these are the same on all. They'll look different, but they work the same. You just untwist them. Oh, and I'll just show you this quick. So this is the piece I started so that you could see like what a whip stitch looks like, and then just the different directions. And I'll show you both how to do a flat whip stitch and just like the basic running stitch. So when you go to put your piece in a hoop, like I said, you need about 2 inches of overhang. And I am gonna get this. I gotta watch out. You won't have to worry about these, but I do. Okay, so that's where my this one you have to pay more attention to where you line it up too. Okay, so I'm gonna tighten this just slightly, and I'm gonna start gently tugging. And you do the same if this was just sitting on a table. I always put my fabric in like when I'm standing or sitting at a table, and then I would move to like my couch and get all comfortable. But it's really important to take your time when you do this and keep the grain of your fabric like as even as possible, so it's not like snaking around. I'm gonna give that another little turn, and then I'm gonna gently push this down, because that will also tighten this. And basically what you're looking for, tighten that up a little bit more, is, can you hear that? It makes a nice little bouncing sound. That's what you want it to do. Then that means that it's exactly kind of the right tautness, because you want it to move. You don't want it to be so tight that it's like the head of a drum.
Can you describe what the grain is for anyone who's joining?
Oh, yeah. So in woven textiles, you basically have a grain line. And so you almost always, you cut with a grain line. You're going to draw your pattern with the grain line. If it's on a diagonal, that's a really good question. I forget that people don't know that. If it's on a diagonal, it will actually stretch and shift on you. That's considered the bias. And so this here, you can really see the grain line easily. Here you can too, not so much in this silk that I have because of how it was woven, but you can usually look and you can see the grain line. And you just kind of want to make it line up as much as possible. Sometimes it's not possible when you're using fabric scraps, and it's not totally necessary, but it's a good practice, I guess, because yeah, otherwise your fabric will sort of stretch in different ways on you.
Thanks. It's good to have that plaid as a sample, because it's the plaid directional is probably matching.
It is. It's kind of cheating. I just like I got a bunch of double cotton gauze, like basically as a remnant. So I bought it all because I really like to stitch on it, because it's an open weave, but it has like a nice feeling, and I like the kind of cushion it gives. But muslin works, linen, cotton. You just don't want anything super heavyweight, because you're adding more patches, and the more layers of fabric you have, the more work you're going to have to do to get your needle through the fabric. So that's important. I would never stitch on canvas, but that's me, and that's because I don't want to hurt my hands. Heavy denim is as much as I would go, and I would only do that if I was patching. I would never like make like an art piece on it, because it would just like, yeah, it would kill my hands.
Yeah,
which I want to avoid. Oh, and one other trick about needles, the reason why you want different sizes is because if you're going to do circular things, shorter needles are better, and shorter needles make shorter stitches. Longer needles are going to force you to make longer stitches. So, and you can pick up more stitches and you can go more quickly. Not that quick is important, but it can, sometimes you just want to go, and it's fun. I usually will change needle sizes so that I get different stitch lengths, because I find it more interesting, but it's a personal preference, and I like my stitches to be kind of very uneven. Now, I am one of those people that I kind of spit on my thread, which some people are highly against. You can use a needle threader if you want. I know there's other tricks. There's like the quilter's knot, which I can never seem to figure out. But basically, when I start, I always do an overhand knot. You don't have to do an overhand knot. There are other knots, and I'll show you a different way of making a knot while I'm going around here. I'll just show it to you because I can explain it. Okay, I'm gonna start here, and when I start, I usually go about 1/4 of an inch in. If you need to draw that out, draw it out. I can usually kind of eyeball it, and the reason why I say that is because that's gonna go in your seam, so you don't really need to stitch there. All right, I'm gonna grab my thimble. But basically, a basic running stitch is like kind of the first thing people learn. And you're just grabbing, is that clear enough? Yeah, here, I'll kind of hold it up so you can see what I'm doing.
Perfect, thanks.
So you're just grabbing, and then you're just pushing, like I'm just pushing through. If you don't have a thimble on, you'll probably just maybe grab up to 3. Let's see if I can do this. I'm using the longer needle too, because it'll be easier for you guys to see. Yeah, three is totally doable. That's not hard. I think if you're going to try to grab more than 3 stitches, you definitely want to train yourself to use a thimble. One more note that I forgot to say is length of thread. I usually use a 36-inch length of thread. That's long. Sometimes I'll use longer, but that's just, I'm used to doing this, and so it doesn't bother me. I'll get tangles every now and then, but I just straighten them out. If you're just starting, I would stick with more like 24-inch lengths of thread until you get more comfortable. The other thing is your tail. Do at least a 6-inch tail. I tend to do a slightly longer tail, mostly because I'm using a longer piece of thread. The other thing to keep in mind when you're coming to the end, you always want to end on the back side. So sometimes I'll be going along and then I'll actually pull my needle back a little bit so that I can just make sure that I'm ending on the opposite side for when I start again, like right in the fuzzy bits. But yeah, and then to turn, you just come up, and I stagger my stitches. I'll run the needle through so you can see. I've noticed this when I've been teaching, like no matter what you do, and I do it all the time, you eventually, if you're not paying attention, so see, I don't know if you can see here, I'll pull it through. If you can see how I offset the stitches. Yeah, can you see? So I just staggered that one down. And if I was going along and not paying attention, eventually all of my stitches would just like, they'll totally line up. I don't know what the phenomena is or like why you end up doing it, but everybody does it. It's like a weird pattern recognition thing that your brain does where it's like, oh no, things need to line up. And so you just automatically start lining things up. But yeah, so this is running stitch. And this is pretty much the main stitch you need to know and become comfortable with. And it's like the first stitch basically you learn when you learn hand sewing. And like I said, you can vary the thicknesses of your, or not thicknesses, the length of your stitches, and trade off and on needle sizes or not, and just keep going with a longer or shorter needle. like this one, you can tell I used a shorter needle, if that, so
Yeah.
see the difference in lengths. And it's mostly because the rigidity of these needles kind of keep you from really doing a whole bunch of short little ones, because you just can't bend the needle that much. Oh, I'll show you the other no knot technique, because I think this is a great, and I even do this just as I'm sewing along to add a little texture that no one will ever see, but I like to know that that secret is there. So you'll pull your stitch down and under. So if you're starting, like you're not making a knot, and I would usually have my hand under here and holding on to give yourself a 4-inch tail, just because that way you're less likely to pull it in. And then you go back and you want to split. You can see that I split the thread. It's kind of going up and in. Normally you don't want to split the thread, but in this case you do, because what that does is it creates more tension. And then I do kind of usually hold my finger there since I split the thread, because sometimes it'll pull out your tail. And then you just poke back down to where the beginning of your stitch is and pull it down. And because you've gone through that stitch twice and split the thread, see, it makes a slightly different, like a little bump, but it's not really that noticeable. And then you won't have a knot if you don't want to use a knot. Sometimes knots, like if it's somewhere, like if you're doing mending and it's somewhere where you're going to like rest your arm, sometimes knots, you can feel them. And so in that case, I would probably try to avoid making knots.
Would that be a knot that you would make at the end of when you're running out of thread, or is that to join a new thread?
You can do that, and you can do it when you're joining a thread. You can do it at the beginning if you don't want to do an overhand knot, and you can also do it at the end. I will show you my favorite end knot, and I'll actually, what I'll do is I'll just bring this over here. I'm just going to take this, let's see, I'll just take this off because I can pick this out later. So if I was doing, let's see, no, I'll do it right here because it'll go in the seam, so it won't matter. So I end with what's called a tailor's knot. And what you do is you can either go to the left or the right, depending on what feels natural to you, but then you come up and under. So it's almost like a pretzel knot or an overhand knot. And then what I do, make sure you can see this, I kind of put my finger in there to start, and then I'll pull it down. And then I stick my needle right where the thread is coming up. And then I'll pull it off to the side, and that keeps the knot, it'll keep pushing it down. And so then you can snug it up to the fabric, and then I just kind of take my fingernail and give it a little pull. And so you get this super like tight, but not too tight, nice little knot. So that's a tailor's knot, and that is almost always the knot I use to end, or I would do this no knot technique. Yeah, because they're both really easy and they look nice. So again, if you're doing a tailor's knot, you kind of loop your thread around and bring your needle under, and then keep your finger kind of here. And now I actually have that knot there, so it's really easy. But you then put your tip of your needle down and then pull kind of off to the side and down. You don't want to pull up. And then it makes a nice little knot. So
Great.
That is a good trick. I forgot to tell you guys about scissors. You need fabric scissors that are sharp that you only use for fabric, and you want a small pair of thread snips or embroidery scissors, because you're more likely to cut your fabric if you use really big scissors. And then when you cut your threads, try to give yourself 1/4 of an inch of thread. It's just good practice. Now I want to show you how to do a flat whip stitch, which is like this. And it's a little bit different than when you're whip stitching the side of a project, which we'll do when we stitch up the patchwork bag.
Before we move on to the whip
Okay.
stitch, could you just share whether you made that tailor's knot on the front side or the back side?
Normally I would make it on the back side. I just did it on the front side so you guys could see it. And if I flip over the hoop stand, you can't see underneath it.
Right.
So yeah, make it on the back side. And I'll show it. I can probably show it to you again when I'm showing you how to do the no hoop method, which I'll move on to that shortly.
And what thread are you using right now?
Oh, I'm using my thread. I'm using my hand-dyed thread, which is basically the equivalent of, it would be like the larger size of sashiko thread, or it would be like 3 strands of regular embroidery floss, which I don't use regular embroidery floss because I feel like you get like little burbles in it, and I don't like it as much. So I just use this, which is also the same as like I think it's size 5 in pearl cotton, and it's Crocheters cotton 10, somewhere around there.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so, okay, so always starting from the back to the front, like when you're doing a whip stitch, actually turn this like this. All you're doing is you're basically doing a whip. Where a running stitch, you're kind of doing a wave. This, you're kind of doing a circular movement, and you're just, oh, my glue didn't stick there, but you're just making, it's almost like stitches. But you're just kind of lining it up, and you can make it as neat or messy as you want. I like using it as a texture, both in mending and like when I do patchwork, because you can add like a nice pop of color. It holds your edges down if you want to hold your edges down. Yeah, so it's really easy. You're just doing a circular movement. One other thing I want to touch on is often when I'm going in one direction, switching to the other, where a patch will overlap, I do what I call like little locking stitches, where I'll actually just bump over into the other patch, and that just kind of helps hold down that edge. You don't have to do it. I just do it like every now and then. Like I didn't really do it on this because it's all fluffy, and I wanted the fluff to stay because I thought it was cute.
Can you hold it a little bit closer to
yeah.
the camera so we can see some of the stitch detail? Perfect. Yeah, so that yellow is the whip stitch you were just showing, is that right?
Yep. And that one I did kind of tidy, and I also did it messy. You can make X's, you can make it thicker or thinner. Yeah, it's just a fun, I really love the texture of that stitch. And when I use it on like garments, I usually use a finer thread, just because it makes this sort of like almost like a satin stitch in embroidery, but a messy satin stitch. But all right, I'll show you the no hoop method. I use this a lot when I'm working in an area on a garment where I can't actually get a hoop in, which doesn't happen too often because I do have some smaller hoops, but I still think it's really, I want to use my bigger needle. So in this instance, oh here, I'll start with the no knot so you can see it. So I'm going to go in about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm just going to sort of pinch off that tail and leave it over there. And then I'm going to go in. And then I'm going to come back up through here. And I'm going to try to split my thread. And I'm going to pinch it. And then I'm going to go back through. You can tell I don't do no hoop method very often. I didn't get that quite straight, but see, it makes like a nice little, can you see that little bump, and then you can trim off that tail and it won't slide on you. So you do need to do this working at a table, because otherwise you'll either sew it into your clothes or you'll stab yourself. So definitely work at a table. And then what I usually do is I just hold it down and I'll just kind of gather a few stitches and then gently pull it. And you're just kind of almost accordion gathering. I'm just sort of almost like doing a pleat or a ruffle and gathering. And then you can just pull it, pinch and pull it through. If you have, I do that thimble. If you really want to do a lot of stitches to gather, if you put on a sashay coat thimble, you can actually just really push and pull and go pretty fast, actually. Not that we're doing this for speed, but this comes in handy when you're doing flat work. Okay, so, and I'll show you tailor's knot again. Since I'm on the back.
Can you show us a close-up of the fabric on the needle?
Oh yeah, I'll totally do that.
Running stitch, thank you.
Yeah, good call. Okay, so here, I'll do this and then I'll pick it up and show you. Okay, so it's there, and basically all I'm doing, I'm gonna back up my needle just a little bit so you can see this better. I'm just grabbing and I'm using, this finger is just sort of sliding, and this hand is actually doing the manipulation of the fabric.
So your fabric is all bunched up.
Yep, all bunched up.
Got that. You're not pushing, please don't push with your bare hand if anyone's watching that. She's got the thimble on.
Yeah. If you're only doing a few stitches, you probably don't need this. And there's a way you can just sort of pinch and pull the needle through. I just think this is good precautionary because you will end up pushing this on your skin. And if you do it enough, you can, I have broken skin in my fingertip before with the eye of a needle. It's extremely painful. I don't suggest it. It actually kind of tears your skin. So yeah, if you're going to do a lot of that, do fewer stitches or make sure you have like a little thimble. Mm-hmm. It's good, safe practice, and we like to be safe. Okay, I will move us on to the pouch completed. These are my 2 pieces of cord that I cut to 20 inches. This was my completed piece. Oh, another tip that I do often is I'll actually draw out what I'm going to do and I'll make notes, partially because I like to keep sort of records of what I do, and then also I'll find that I like certain layouts of patches and sizes, and so I can always go back and reference, but you don't have to do a guide. Okay, so this I've cut out, and just cut out your shape, check your measurements, and do any trimming if you need to do any trimming. I always press because I like to iron things, but you don't have to. You can finger press, and you can also use straight pins to hold things into place. But so I basically folded this in half, and then I took this side. I took my ruler and I marked 3 inches. And then I know when I fold this down, that's going to be 1.5 inches. So that's kind of a good way to do that. And then,
right. And this is following along with the pattern tutorial.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
This is all online. If anyone joined us a few minutes late, we're just going through the patchwork pouch tutorial that's on Heidi's website, Honeyfolk Clothing. You can find it in the shop, but it is a free download.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got another free download if you decide you want something more complicated after you've made a few of these. Okay, so after I folded this down, I'm going to mark my 1/4 inch. And it doesn't have to be exact. but use my chalk pen, 3/4 inch, because we're basically making a 1/2 inch channel, so on both sides. And this is just so that it's easy, really easy to thread your cord. Because if you make small channels, you're just going to make your life harder. And this is supposed to be a fun, quick little project. And you can do one of these in, I think like 3 or 4 hours. If you're not like, if you just sort of like take your time and enjoy it. It is important to take breaks and just rest your hands and get up and move around. Definitely stretch. I do this a lot, and I just gently roll my wrists, because you will find, especially when you first start, you're going to hold onto your needle too tightly and you're going to be like kind of intense, and eventually you'll be less intense about it, but it takes a little practice. When you download the pattern, you can actually cut out along this little square and use that and make that like your bottom template. I just made one out of some craft paper, but the next thing you're going to want to do is lay this on top and basically just mark where you're going to do your running stitch. And as you will notice, I do not cut any of this fabric. And the reason for that is, if you don't want a rounded pouch, you can just stitch up the sides and make a little square pouch. And if you ever get tired of your pouch, you can take out all your stitches, and then you have a rectangle that you can use as a patch. You can add it to other patches and make like a patchwork pillow. It just allows you to transform this textile and keep it around like even longer if you tire of your pouch. All right, so let me get out my. First thing we're going to do is we're going to run our channel. And this goes, I'm actually going to have the knot on the wrong side of the fabric, and your right sides of your fabric are together. And then I'm just going to do pretty long running stitches here, because it's not really, they don't have to be tight. And I'm actually resting my needle on that thimble, because then I can actually gather the entire length. And these are probably at least 1/2 inch long stitches. I'm going to push it, and then I'm going to gently pull that down.
And that's along that chalk line that you marked, right?
Yep, it's along the 1/4 inch chalk line. Okay, and then I will make my tailor's knot, which again, we're looping around, we're bringing the needle underneath the thread. We're putting our needle tip where the thread came out of the fabric, and we're pulling it kind of just straight across and away from ourselves, or to the sides, whatever is the most comfortable. And this one I would definitely recommend doing in like an overhand knot and not the no knot, because this is going to get a little more, because of where it is and where the strings are always moving. I just feel like an overhand knot is going to be a better knot for this particular thing. Okay, now I'm doing the bottom, or the second part of the channel. Pushing that through. Then I'm going to do this a little bit. And I do that to make sure my stitches aren't pulled too tightly. Okay, cut that. How are we on time?
We are just about an hour into the tutorial.
Okay, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, it's very meditative to watch you. And I don't have any questions at the moment, but if anyone has a question, please do use that Q&A box.
Yeah, I think like I do a live cast 5 days a week. I skip Wednesdays and Saturdays on Instagram. Um, and yeah, we hang out and we sew, and it's really nice.
Yeah.
So,
And I know
yeah.
you have themes as well. You've been talking about natural dyeing a little bit
Hmm.
and specific projects and techniques.
Yeah, I'm so excited that the weather is warmer now because I would like to do some more on natural dyeing, and especially because this time of year, I guess not everywhere. We're lucky because we're in Northern California and we can basically gather stuff all year round. But soon things will be growing. Okay, this length of thread is a little bit short, but I would still save this. And when I get a shorter length of thread, I fold it in half, and then I'll fold it in half again. If it's longer, I'll sort of do the same thing, but keep folding it. And then I just do like a little gentle kind of half knot. And then I have a little box that I keep these in, because you never know when you need a tiny, tiny bit of thread. Especially when I do the spiderweb pouch, my other pattern, I often use a bunch of little short pieces of thread just to use them up, because it's nice that it actually has different colors in it.
Oh, here's a great question that came in from Douglas. If we don't have access to cord, do you recommend making t-shirt yarn or sewing a strip, tape, etc.?
Oh yeah, you can do that. And I actually, so I did I twisted up some cords because I was like, oh, what if somebody needs to make cord? And so you can actually just tear fabric, and I can show you how to do this. You can also take fabric and braid it and make a cord that way, but this is just a simple like twist cord, and I'll show you guys how to do that because this is a great way to make a little cord. And you can do it with thread, you can do it with fabric, you can do it with yarn, and then yeah, you don't have to buy cord if you don't have cord. And I've also taken strips of fabric and just sewn them together a couple of times and made almost like what I call like a fake bias tape, because it's not cut on the bias. And yeah, it's a great way to do it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I have to remember that I've been doing textiles for years, and I basically have everything I need in my studio at all times, which I know not everybody does. So something for me to keep in mind. Okay.
Well, I love how you're showing us different levels too, you know, with the hoop or without the hoop, with any size needle you have, or if people want to explore, you know, the longer size needle, the thimbles.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like I have to admit this because I've thought about things a lot more, and I've done one in-store pickup. But it's like access to things are not as easy right now, and we don't really know kind of how quickly things are going to move forward, if things are going to open up again. So it's nice to just be able to kind of forage in your home. And actually, I was going to say, part of the other piece I was doing is one of the fabrics, the silky fabric, is from a slip that I made that was leftover scrap, which I know not everybody has that, but you can use like an old handkerchief. And another chunk was from a torn pillowcase that I had that I didn't want to patch because I didn't want necessarily to feel the patch on my face. And so I harvested it for fabric. But, you know, well, tea towels, linens, things like that, shirts and things that you maybe don't want to wear anymore, or maybe you just don't feel like fixing, you can turn those into other things. And I don't think we always think about, you know, transforming a damaged garment into something completely different. But it's a great thing, and the fabric is already soft and wonderful. So, okay, so we're gonna do a whip stitch on this edge, and we're actually gonna start it like down here, just below the channel that you made, about a 1/4 inch down from the channel, or just under the channel. And
can you hold that up a little closer?
Oh yeah, thank you, Jess.
Yeah.
So I'm pinching it like right here, and you can put a pin in at this point, like if you want this to be held into place. I usually just put one like right in the middle of the project, or I'll use a safety pin, but then that way it doesn't shift on you. But I'm going to do a slightly different technique here. So I'm going to poke this in about 1/4 inch in. And the reason why we do that is because if the depth of your seam isn't deep enough, it can actually pull apart on you, which you want to avoid. And when I'm starting this, because there is more tension at this point right here, because it's where your drawstring is going to go, I'm going to go in and around 3 times into the same spot. And that's going to make that really, really, really strong. So I just looped it around 3 times, and now we're good to go. And you can actually, at this point, you can choose just to do a running stitch all the way around. I like to do a whip stitch here because a little bit of that stitching pops through to the other side, and I think it's really pretty. But yeah, so then you just, so here you'll really see the whipping motion of a whip stitch and why they call it a whip stitch. But again, and this doesn't have to be like crazy super close together. If you're doing a running stitch, you'll want to do it, the stitch is slightly shorter than you did in the channel. It's depending on, because you never know how much stuff you're going to stuff in your tiny little magic pouch. You know, how many acorns you're going to put in there, or like what jewelry you're going to put in there, or I don't know, other things. I took one and I put some nice crystals and some of my favorite tea, and I did a little drawing and I sent it to a friend. So also these are like really nice to make because they don't take too much time, and it is a very like thoughtful little gift right now. I think I would be super happy if somebody sent me one of these in the mail. I'm coming up to where the curve starts, and so I'm going to stop, and now I'm going to switch to running stitch. And again, you want to do this running stitch slightly shorter than what you did in the channel. And so I'm doing that accordion thing again, where I'm just bunching it together. If you're not going to use a thimble, I would just do like 2 stitches at a time, because this is really thick. Like we are now in like, let's see, 4 or 5 layers of fabric, depending on where your patches overlap. So yeah, if I didn't have a thimble on, I might even just do this 1 stitch at a time. Especially right there, because that's where I did that flat whip stitch, and that is a very, very thick seam to go over. But I guess I'm making these kind of long, but they'll be fine. You actually don't have to worry so much about this bottom seam if I really think about it, because it's folded here, so it can't pull apart, which is nice. I do often use a brighter piece of thread here, or a more contrasting piece of thread, so that it would be easy for me to pick these stitches out if I decided I didn't want this to be a pouch anymore. Okay, now we're coming back up to where that stops, and so now we're just going to switch back to whip stitch. And again, I'm going about 1/4 inch in. You can also choose to blanket stitch this edge if you like doing blanket stitch. And I will show you blanket stitch on another piece because it's going to be easier, because that's another good, I did not make my piece of thread quite long enough. Oh, dang it. Okay, this is a good lesson. So, and it's fine if my piece of thread wasn't long enough, but like right now, if you can see how short that tail is, you don't want to go any further. You want to stop and tie this off, because now your thread length is about equal to your needle, which is going to make it a lot harder to knot off. But okay, so I'm going to show you another little trick. If I can show you this, if it'll show up. So I'm going to actually pull my needle through, and I kind of have my finger pinched like right there. I'm going to pull that through, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to then put the eye of the needle back through that, and I'm just going to keep my thumb there and pull that through, and because my needle point is there, it's going to make that tight. And it's just like doing a tailor's knot. That's a good little trick, but you're only going to use that if you're like me and you didn't give yourself a long enough tail. But then that's like a good way to be like, oh yeah, it's okay. I don't have to back it out. I can just keep going. I'm going to cut another piece of thread and we'll finish this, and then I will show you a really quick, good trick for running the cords through. All right, and since I stopped right there, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start my thread just below where I ended it. And that's so I don't have a weird gap. So I'm going to go up, up, up. And then I'm good enough on that side. It's good to stop and check too, to make sure you didn't go too shallow on one side. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go over here and check to see how far I went up. And then I'm going to match that. I need to go just a little bit further. And I'm going to do the same thing where I go through the same spot 3 times. And another thing is, like, you don't have to pull your whip stitch super tight. You just want to pull it enough so the fabric just ever so slightly curves around. If you can see how it just starts to curve a little bit, then you'll know your stitch is tight enough and it's not too gappy. Okay, so now I've gone through 3 times. I'm going to pick up a little bit of the fabric and a little bit of the thread, and I'm going to do that same tailor's knot. And pull that nice and tight. It's a very bulky area. But cut that, leave yourself a good 1/4 of an inch tail. And then we're gonna, oh, we have to remember to take our pin out. And we're gonna turn it right side. Isn't it cute? Love it. And that kind of wraps
Beautiful.
it around. So love it. Okay, so now the trick, and I'm actually going to use one of the bigger, I think the bigger safety pins for this. I have an even bigger safety pin, but really little safety pins aren't great. You want to use like a 2-inch pin, but what you do, and this is the same thing like if you have to put a drawstring in a pair of pants or a string back in your hoodie, you want to poke this down about 1/2 of an inch so that there's no way it's going to pull out, especially if you have a woven cord or if you have ribbon or something like that. Fold it over and then put this through so you don't tear your ribbon. This is a fairly short distance, so you probably wouldn't, but it's still good practice. Okay, so I'm not putting a knot on this end yet because we don't want to. But so you have that like that. You're going to pop it in that channel and you're just going to grab and push. And then you can just wiggle that and just grab and push. And it just slides in so easily. Pull that out. And at this point, if you're afraid you're going to pull it out too far, you can take and pin this down to your pouch. And then you don't have to worry about it pulling through, because I have done that where I just like pull it through really fast and I have to start over. So that's a good way that you can't pull it through. Now we're going to go to the other side and pop that in, push it through, just pushing and wiggling. Okay, now we've got it over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out, and I am going to go ahead and tie this off. And I just leave, you know, a little end. Now we're going to go and do the other side. And by all reasons, like, you could actually stop here and it's still going to work. it's still going to cinch up. But to have like a true sort of pull, like a tight drawstring pouch. Now what we want to do is we want to go to the other side and pop that through. And again, wiggle, wiggle and pull, wiggle and pull. And this, you have that other piece of cord in there, so it takes a little more work to get it through. The other reason why I made the channel bigger, so you can use different types of cord and not worry about it being too thick for your pouch.
What cord material are you working with right now?
It's just a natural cotton cord. It's really inexpensive. It's easy to find. I have it in this color because I do dye it sometimes, and then I also have it in black. But twill tape is really good. Sturdier ribbons like grow grain is also good. You can use softer ribbons. Just know that if it's used a lot, you might have to replace it. But yeah, I didn't do that evenly, but that's fine. See?
Beautiful.
Together. You have a great little pouch. Yeah, and now you can stick your treasures in there and your tea or your jewelry or things like that. I want to show you guys blanket stitch, if that's okay. Is everybody okay on time, or should I move more to mending stuff?
I think blanket stitch and then mending would be great. We are recording. If anyone has to hop off, you'll get the link to the video as soon as we upload it.
Okay, what happened to my thread that was right there? I lost my thread. That's okay, because I have tons of thread. I'm in my studio.
And Barbara wrote into the chat on the subject of cords, leather straps, ribbon, and linen waxed cord.
Yes.
Those all sound like great options.
Yeah, and I've seen people use the round leather and the soft flat leather, and it's beautiful. Yeah, that's a good one. If you're doing blanket stitch, definitely start with a knot. Don't try to do it without the knot. You'll hate everything. And so I'm going to actually start over here so you guys can see how I start. I'm going to go in between my layers and just like tuck it in. And then it's just going to hide in there. And this has already been marked off with 1/4 inch. And then what you do is you're going to go in exactly into the same spot. And you're going to make this nice little loop. Then you're going to take, and this is, I'm pretty sure blanket stitch is a righty-lefty thing. So if you're left-handed, you will be doing the opposite of this. But then what you do is you put your needle back through. And why you do this is because otherwise you won't get this nice sort of like locking elbow line. And you'll see what I'm saying in a second. Okay, so now I've looped it around and taken my needle under and to the right. And so now I kind of have this like loop shape. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch, depends on how much space you want in between, but that's a good amount of space. You're going to put your needle from the front to the back, and then you're going to bring it on top of the thread. Okay, and then you're going to pull straight back gently. And it makes this nice little edge. This, if you want your patches to not fray at all, or you're worried about your patches fraying, you can blanket stitch the edges, especially if you're doing it on the right side of your fabric rather than patching on the wrong side of your fabric when you're mending. This is what blanket stitch looks like on top. And this is the spiderweb pouch pattern that I have that's a little more advanced than the other one. But yeah, you just keep doing that, where you're always going to kind of have your thread like going to the right if you're, or going to the left if you're right-handed, and going to the right if you're left-handed. But yeah, just go again, front to back. Make sure your needle is on top of your thread. And this is actually, to me, the easiest thing to do if you're on a table. It's so much easier. You can do it in your lap, but don't do it in your lap until after you've practiced it a while, because it's really easy to get it turned around, and it gets really messy, and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. But yeah, I'll do one more. So you're going in from the front to the back, and you're going straight in. You're not going in at an angle. Try to go straight down and put your needle on top of your thread. Pull it back. Just give it a gentle tug, because you want it to be, like, if you can see that, it's snug right up to the edge, and it actually looks pretty much the same on both sides. But so that's blanket stitch. So you can also do that if you want to stitch up the sides of your pouch. It's great from keeping edges from fraying, and it's a very pretty little detail. So does that make sense?
It does. And blanket stitch is a common name, right? So just if anyone is looking for maybe a more detailed or like a pictorial drawing online, there's blanket stitch.
Yep. Eventually I will finish my mending zine.
Yes.
I just
looking forward to that.
I just have a day of writing and then some editing to do. But I've been busy doing other things. But yeah, I'm going to take this thimble off. Are there any more questions about any of that?
Oh, a quick question on that spider web you were showing us. Did you use floss or string for that one?
I used string. This one, I think this one, I mean, you could totally do it with embroidery floss. I used my thread for this, or I would use like pearl cotton, because it would be really easy to split embroidery floss, especially with this stitch. So if you use embroidery floss, just go slowly, because you could totally do it. I've seen people do it. I'm just not as patient with embroidery floss. I think that's why I don't usually use it, is because it always, I'm always having to, what they call, milk the threads and pull on them to get them to straighten out again. But yeah.
Yeah, well, the colors are beautiful.
Yeah, this is loquat. That is oak gall. This is mushroom, the dyer's ball. That is pomegranate husk. And this is oak gall and iron.
Beautiful.
This is cochineal and a little bit of iron.
And what will you be doing with this piece?
Oh, this turns into a spiderweb pouch. I'll grab one. I wasn't really thinking about that. I just wanted to be able to show everybody how to do blanket stitch, and that was the easiest way to do it. This is the other little free pattern that I have. So so
it's also on Heidi's website. That if you look in her shop, she's got the spider web pouch and the patchwork pouch.
Yeah, and this one has a liner. This one, see, I did a bad job on blanket stitch because I wasn't paying attention. But this one, you also do a buttonhole, which is you can either whip stitch it, or you do buttonhole stitch, which is blanket stitch, but it's blanket stitch done very close together. But yeah, so this is a fun one. This is just a little more advanced, but it's the same basic principles as the other one. We're just practicing blanket stitch and what they call tambourine stitch, which is more of a darning technique.
And Gail wrote in and said, I did use embroidery thread on my spider web pouch.
And did it work well? And you had no problems? I'm going to have to practice and be more patient with embroidery floss, because it's great. It's easy to get, and it comes in like a gajillion colors. Yeah. All right. I'm going to practice. I'm going to try embroidery floss. More questions, or shall we talk a little bit about kind of how to assess damage on your mending and how to apply all these techniques to mending your garments? Or are people tired of listening to me?
I'm not tired personally. I think moving on to mending would be great. And while you're doing that, I'll just share some appreciation that people have been writing in. With the patchwork pouch, Barbara said, so pretty. Desiree said, lovely, thank you. Leslie wrote that this was a birthday present to myself, and thanks for hosting and teaching.
Yay! Happy birthday!
Yeah, happy birthday, Leslie. And Yuritsa wrote "Que bello," it's beautiful. And the handmade cord actually was.
Oh, handmade cord. Yeah, I'll show you that. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
I actually just found, I'll just set these down here. This was a piece of torn like Liberty that I had on my floor because I have stuff all over my studio right now because it's a mess because I've been making masks and doing all kinds of stuff. And this one's a little bit wide. This is better. This is about 3/4 of an inch. And I think this made a nice size cord. But it's probably easier to see on this one. But basically all I did was I just took and twisted this really tight. And I think if you have a longer piece, you might want to start in the middle area, which I'll do on this one. But you just twist this up on itself and kind of pinch and hold where your twists are and just keep twisting it. And then what you do is you kind of pull out and then the twist travels. And so you just want to put as much energy into the twist as possible. And you can see it as you go like this, as it travels. Twisting, twisting, twisting. This is one of those things that takes time, and I'd actually say it's very similar to making like a nettle cord, and it's easier if you do it on like basically on your thigh. If you have tight pants on or just like a bare leg, it works much easier, but you just twist with your fingers. And then you're going to pinch your two ends together and sort of let that twist travel up and kind of help it. Now, they do make little machines that help you do this. I know Clover makes one because they make everything. But like on this one, I started in the center, and it's the same where you just want to take and you're kind of holding and twisting and holding and twisting. And you want to make sure you're always twisting in the same direction, otherwise you're going to untwist your twist.
So you're building tension in that fabric and
yep,
getting that twist going.
I think this would be easier almost. It's like if you could tie it to something and then just have it hold it into place. But okay, now if I do, I'm going to grab this side and twist. It's definitely easier with thinner fabric, but I thought this would show up better. I'm kind of right. Okay, so there's a fair amount of tension, and you're going to grab it and pull on it. Let's see, am I doing it the right direction? Yes. I haven't practiced this very much, but I think it would get easier if you practice it. But so see how it just like it twists on itself and then it stays twisted because you sort of energized it. It's a lot like plying yarn. So see, it mostly just stays in place then.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and this one definitely did on the thinner. And this is kind of like, to me, the perfect size for the pouch.
All right, well, just to wrap up the pouches, Gail says the embroidery floss worked great.
Yay. Okay, everybody, if you have embroidery floss, use it.
Allison asked, what do you do with that twisted yarn? And my understanding was that you could use that as the cord if you didn't have that cotton cord.
Yeah, like if you happen to have fabric but you don't have any cord, like I said, is like you could braid fabric together, you could sew two pieces together to make it stronger. You could actually crochet it too, and that would be a great little cord, is like a little crocheted cord, or you can do like a little twisty cord. And I know there's some really good sort of videos that you can watch on cord making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, Malia just wrote into the Q&A saying, I use a clip and then twist. If I'm doing a long one, I use a doorknob. So that's great, hopefully around the house for everyone. And then if you have other people at your house, 2 kids twist and they have it turning on a pencil.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
sharing.
that's really good. I like that. Um, all right, I'll start with this one. This is a shirt I fixed for my husband. And he actually, it's funny, like the year before I did this on my machine as like a super quick fix, and he ended up wearing out the same spot on the other side. So now what I would do in future land, if one side was worn out, I would just go ahead and pre-mend the other side before it even wore out, just because I almost find that easier to do. But like right here, since this was a really small area, I just did that by hand. I didn't, there was no point in putting a hoop there. This one, I used my little oval hoop because it was easier, and I'll show you like the inside of this patch and the way the stitches look there. And so right here, there was more damage. And so I actually went in two different directions to kind of trap those threads down because I didn't want to cut a hole out of it. I didn't like what that would look like. And so I just chose to go in two different directions and sort of reweave that area. One of the first things I did before I went to cut out my patch on this was I held this up to light. You can then go to a window, or if you have a really strong lamp, hold it up because you'll be able to see like where the other areas that have been compromised, because you'll be able to see more light through it. And so I knew that this area was also a little more damaged. And so when I'm making a patch, I try to go at least an inch to an inch and a half over the damaged areas, because I have made a patch too close. And what happens when you put that patch and that thread there is that fabric becomes so much stronger than the other fabric that it can actually cause more damage and more tears. Now, the fabric that I chose to patch this with was a lighter weight fabric. You do want to try to match your fabric weights. You can use cotton or linen to patch cotton or linen. It doesn't matter, if it's something like wool, like a woven wool blanket, and you want to patch it, keep in mind if you're using, say the blanket's washable, whatever you patch it with, you want to make sure that it's also washable. And it's okay to use a slightly lighter weight fabric to do a patch, but not a heavier weight fabric, because again, it can actually damage your existing garment because it's then stronger than the original fabric. The other thing that I thought about when I did this was I didn't like the way a square would look on a sleeve. And so I actually made my patch bigger because I thought it made more sense, and aesthetically I liked the way it looked more. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're patching. I will show you, this is the smock that I dye in, so it looks like a total nightmare. I wore this when it was white. It's an antique French linen smock, and I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it. And I quit wearing it because it started to tear here, and I started to get like a lot of wearing on the neckline and holes in different areas. So I decided I was going to fix it, and eventually I'll just over dye this heavily in indigo, and then I'll start wearing it again. But when cuffs are frayed and necklines are frayed, I often just use a whip stitch. A blanket stitch would also look really, really nice. You can also almost use like a bias tape and fold down and just restitch on a whole new piece of fabric. That also looks really pretty. Because this is already pretty rustic, I just sort of kept with that aesthetic and made it a little bit rustic. And again, it's going to get over dyed, and so it'll all be dark blue. But here I use, because this is where it was torn, and I know fabric was missing, and so I needed to make sure to take in consideration that I couldn't just stitch that closed, because it would pucker and leave like what would look more like a scar. I mean, not that this doesn't look like a scar, but you need to think about if fabric is worn away, you need to replace that with other fabric, but not just backing it. It needs to become part of the piece, like visibly. So yeah, I did this like a little more rough and ready. Here's another piece where I played around a little bit more. This area here was really worn, so I definitely went over that more to keep the threads down. And then I just sort of did these pieces in reference to that piece. Yeah, and here's a part where it was starting to tear apart there, so I just did a little flat whip stitch. And again, I had another hole. So that is that piece. And then I will show you pre-mending. I have 3 pairs of these pants. They're part of my clothing line. I love them. They're like really soft and comfortable, and they're like drop crotch pants. And so if you're like me and you're not paying attention and you're climbing around on stuff, if you don't sort of hitch them up like you would a skirt, you'll tear a hole in the crotch. And so this was the first mending I did. And basically,
Can you hold that a little closer?
oh yeah, sorry. Basically, again, I knew there was an actual hole there, so I needed to make sure you could see the fabric. I just whip stitched around the edges, and the seams were a little bit worn there, so then I just sort of whip stitched on top of that, and I just made the patch. I just kind of thought about what the patch would look like, and I didn't want just like this outlined hole, and so I made more of a rectangle and just played around with the stitches a little bit. The black pair of linen pants that I have that are like this, I have probably 7 patches I need to make. I've had them the longest. They're the first pair that I made, and they are completely threadbare because I wear them all the time, except for right now because I'm not allowed to wear them. These I overdyed in indigo, and you can see where they've already worn more because the indigo starts to rub off. And so I decided to look at my black pair of linen pants and see where a lot of the wear areas are, and I'm actually just going ahead and I'm pre-mending these. So I used a couple of different colors of indigo thread that I dyed, and I'll show you the inside because you'll be able to see the patches more. Now I haven't washed these yet because I'm still working on them. This I've washed, so you can see that it really doesn't fray that much, especially if you cut with the grain line. If you cut with the grain line, you're going to get very little fraying. And then it just basically, it frays up about to where your first stitch line is. But so it didn't, I haven't even trimmed this, but so I've washed these several times since I've done this patchwork. So you can see that the patches don't really fray that much. So this is my internal patchwork. I like this because it's a secret. I know what's under there. Nobody else does, because I put like a little scrap of Liberty of London fabric, which makes me so happy that it's there, but no one will ever see it. This is some more double cotton gauze because I really like kind of the texture it adds to the fabric. This is linen, and this is some of Sally Fox's cotton. And these are all roughly the same weight. The reason why I used this here was because my patches actually slipped, and I did that on my other pair, and then I got a tear right there because these 2 things were stronger than this piece of fabric, even though that fabric wasn't damaged at all. It caused tension. So, and basically I kind of designed out these patches, keeping in mind what they were going to look like, but I'll add a lot more stitches to these in the end. This was also the first piece that I started playing around with not using a hoop, because I found that it's much easier to do this pant leg without using a hoop. And so I just do that running and pushing technique right there. And you can kind of see, like right here, I want to go back and do like a diagonal stitch over that just because I think it would be pretty. And yeah, I have patches wrapping around all the way to there, and I'll kind of do a similar style on the other side. But yeah, I just decided I would pre-mend these and not wait for them to actually get holes. It's better if you notice your fabric is wearing to stop and patch it then, and not wait until there's like a big gaping hole, because it does make it more difficult, especially in like the inner thighs and the crotch and the seat of your pants, because there's heavier seams there, and it's really, really hard to do mending. Like if you think about the box of a pair of jeans, that's what they call the crotch area. just the way all the pieces of fabric fit together, it's really hard to get them flat and to lay in a way where it's easy to do your stitches. So if you notice that, fix those before they get bad. And my favorite way of fixing jeans is actually using jersey. It's the one time I really break my fabric rule. And mending woven fabric, which is what this is, jersey is
knit fabric.
Yeah, it's knit fabric, and so it behaves completely differently. And if I was going to mend jersey, I would definitely use a milliner's needle, because milliner's needles are thinner and longer, and they are really, really sharp. You're going to be less likely, because the thing is, when you're mending jersey, you can actually put holes into it if you break too many of the threads. When you're sewing jersey on a sewing machine, you use what they call a ballpoint needle, and it's sharp, but it doesn't actually have like a true point. I don't know if you can get ballpoint hand sewing needles, but you might be able to. I don't mend a lot of jersey. I end up using it to mend other things. But yeah, so as far as the only time I really break my patch with similar fabric rule is I always use jersey to patch denim, because I always end up with holes in the inner part of my thighs, and I don't want to add more bulk there. And in the knees, which everyone wears out their jeans in their knees. And it's because, again, it's lightweight and it's super flexible and stretchy, and you're always bending your knees. And so I feel like it just feels better on my skin. Yeah, and it doesn't add bulk. That's like the main thing when it's in the seat of your pants or on in your inner thigh. If you use fabric that's too thick, you feel it and it's so uncomfortable. And so, yeah, I always use jersey.
That's a great tip. Do you use a running stitch to attach the jersey?
I do. I use a running stitch. And sometimes I'll actually, rather than using a hoop or glue, I'll baste first. And a basting stitch is just a running stitch, except you're going to make your stitches like 3/4 or an inch long, and you do it with regular sewing thread, and you don't need to make any knots. You just leave long tails, because after you're done, you're just going to pull those out. So it's a good way to not use pins. You can just do a basting stitch, which is the same as a running stitch. It's just even longer. And then you remove them afterwards. So yeah, it's a good way to kind of fit weird areas.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so yeah, basically everything we did on the pouch, you basically apply to when you're mending things. Like if you have patches, say you patched one spot and then you're like, oh, I really need to add another patch here because it's wearing out next to it. Make sure your patches overlap 1/4 of an inch so that you're creating strength there and not actually weakening the fabric.
Yeah, and the pouch seems like such a great way for people to try these techniques and get a handle on both the techniques and the aesthetics too, of what they might like in terms of stitch length and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it is good. Does anybody have any more questions or need me to go over something again?
Let me change. Okay, there we are. Yeah, no questions in the Q&A box right now, but this is a great last few minutes for anyone to ask any final questions. We have gotten some gratitude in the chat box. Terry said, inspires me to get back to hand stitching. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really, I feel like right now it's it gives you something to do. I do most of my stitching in the evening on my couch, either listening to an audiobook or binge watching Masterpiece Theater. But it's a nice kind of meditative quality. I mean, it's similar to like knitting or crocheting or something like that, where it just kind of, to me, it really makes me calm and keeps me like in the moment and from like my brain getting away from me.
Yeah. I resonate with that. And Malia just wrote in, thank you so much. It's perfect for this time sheltering at home. I'm so grateful. This was very inspiring.
Yay, that's good.
Catherine wrote, "You're an excellent instructor. Thanks." Yeah, so just a lot of thank yous coming in. But as a reminder, if
Yay.
anyone has a final burning question, let us know. But yeah, thank you, Heidi. I see one question popped up.
Okay.
Oh, it's a comment. It's been sanity stitching for me.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, stitch meditation, sanity stitching. It's very, very true. It's good. And that's the other reason why I ended up designing, I mean, originally the patchwork pattern I did for a mending class that got canceled because it was right before everything, like before shelter in place took place. And I decided that it would be nice to have free patterns because not everybody has a job right now. Income is kind of scary. And so I just thought it was like a really nice kind of gesture and good, like where we could all kind of hang out and do something together and not feel so isolated. Because I know that can be kind of a big thing for a lot of people. I worked at home for years, and so I don't mind being home and not going to a job, even though I was going to a job at the time. Yeah, so, but it's different when you choose to stay at home and when you kind of have to stay at home. So yeah, it's nice that we can all be together. Oh, it must have ended. All right.
But internet problem on my side. We can for a minute. We may have lost Heidi as well. So I will definitely be emailing everyone. Thank you for joining. And please do check out Heidi's work online. Honeyfolk Clothing is her website. That's also her Instagram handle. You can find the pouch tutorials and sounds like a future mending zine on her site. Thank you all for joining so much, bearing with us with the internet hiccup. We're really grateful. And again, share with us if you do make these projects or you find something useful on social media or on email, and we'll upload the video. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. If anyone is still left, apologies for the connectivity issues. We'll be sending out the video and the links, and we hope to see you on the internet and hopefully in person again sometime soon. So I'm going to wrap it up for now. Thank you.